What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. Me being a low-key super fan of From Software as a studio and the games that they have made for us over the years, but also having had my own strange little journey with this franchise, or with this bunch of franchises stuck together, as I kind of entered it quite late, I thought it would be pretty interesting for us to sit together and make a tier list of all of the games that have, when we started with Demon's Souls all the way back in February of 2009, and then obviously with the most recent release of Alden Ring. Now again, like I said, I've kind of played these in a disjointed way and haven't actually played them all the way through from the front to the back, so I think it would be interesting, and at least that might have actually affected the way that I built my tier list. But without any further ado, let's jump right in. So when we look at the tier list itself, and maybe the first thing I'll do is I'll just explain my rating system. And so I've got greatest of all time, GOAT, at the top, which is obviously reserved for the best ones out of these games. Then we have amazing, then we have good, we have rough, and then finally we have didn't play. Now you'll notice that none of these are necessarily really bad or damning on a game, and that's really because the studio has such a pedigree that even the shittiest, From Software game is usually still leagues ahead of most other games of its kind, or just most games in general. So that being said, when we are building a tier list like this, of course there will be some ones which just naturally rise to the top and are just either better from a gameplay perspective, or just the combat system, or anything like that. There's going to be things that are going to make it be elevated above some of the other ones, and at the same time that's going to leave some stuff at the bottom of the list around the rough category. But that, again, like I said, is not an indication that the game is poor or terrible. In any case, it's just not as good as the ones above it. Now, as mentioned at the start of this video, I actually started playing the games in a strange order. I started with Dark Souls 2, then went to Dark Souls 1, then had Bloodborne, then Dark Souls 3, and kind of progressed through it that way. So I definitely think that has had an effect on what I think about Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 for sure, but also probably about the rest of the series as well. But in our way that we're going to work our way through this tier list, let's go ahead and do it chronologically, and that of course means that we start with Demon's Souls, which came out in 2009 February. So this is the only one that's in the category of didn't play. This was a game that was not on my radar at all, and in 2009 this was not the kind of game that I was interested in. It was on my peripheral, and it is something that I knew about at that time, but I just never even got around to giving it a try. None of my friends were playing it, so it was not really something that, and even if I recall, this was an incredibly difficult game. Back in those days, I was actually living in Africa, and it was quite difficult to actually get hold of most new games. And so if I recall correctly, this was a more difficult game to get hold of, and certainly wasn't available in some of the shops where we were renting games from. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't play the remake, but of course we'll get later on in this tier list, we'll get to that. That then means that Demon's Souls is the only one in this category that I have to put into didn't play. However, I kind of feel like, and also comparing my notes to some other contemporaries that have done similar lists to this, or people that have discussed these games with me, it kind of seems that what you got from Demon's Souls remake is kind of like almost like the same, and so your thoughts on the remake would probably be aligned with your thoughts on the original game as well. So I think that covers that basically. But then chronologically getting us to the next one is of course Dark Souls, the very first one, which came out in September of 2011. Now Dark Souls is, has all of the things that usually are available in a From Software game, and that is the fact that you usually have amazing boss design, so amazing boss fights, and whether that can be from a spectacle perspective or from a mechanical perspective, Dark Souls was no slouch here. Just fantastic boss design and enjoyable boss encounters, except for fucking Ornstein and Smoke. Fuck that. I hated that boss combination. That was such a hardcore skill check that it was just ridiculous the amount of times that I spent in that fight and died in that fight, and literally then of course the consequent sense of accomplishment that once you're able to do that, but more specifically once you're able to beat them repeatedly and you understand the fight a lot better. I think Dark Souls, one of the things that I enjoy about the game, especially thinking back on it now, it's obviously been many years since I've played it, but it's just how strong a foundation it set for the rest of the series. And that's one of the things that I like the most about the Souls series, is this interconnectivity of level design, where oftentimes much later in the game you loop back and you're like, oh my god, here's the start of the game, I've done this entire travel and killed like 20 bosses only to essentially complete the loop, and I'm right back at the start. And there's something so satisfying about that, and that is so present in Dark Souls 1 that, it shows like a studio, they're doing these things, they've got the boss design, they've got the level design, they've got all of that, and then once those things start becoming like the favorite things of the fans that play the game, the studio doubles down on it, and you can see it in the later iterations of the games as they come out, the franchise, that they know where their strong points are, but more specifically that they know the points that they get judged on the most, and so they just keep on improving on those. Now, like I said, the interconnectivity of Dark Souls for me was such a big deal that, I mean, I think I would be kind of like silly if I didn't put it in the amazing category. Now, when we get to Dark Souls 2, which is next on our list here, which came out in March of 2014, then this is where it gets interesting, because I started playing the franchise, and more specifically the first Dark Souls game for me was Dark Souls 2. It was like this weird thing where I was a fan of it, but then after playing Dark Souls 2 and then playing Dark Souls 1, because I was like, holy shit, if I like this game so much, I should probably go back and play the other ones. And after playing Dark Souls 1, I realized that everything that I just said about Dark Souls, kind of like it seemed like From Software went in a little bit of a different way with Dark Souls 2. So Dark Souls 2 had a lot more frustrating boss encounters for me, and even though the combat model was better, and I mean, you had powers dancing and all of that, and as from a controlling perspective, I would say the game was in a better place. It had terrible boss design in the base game, in the base version of Dark Souls 2, and that's an important point that I will sort of elaborate more on just now. But it's weird when you play a game and then you play the first game, so you play its prequel, which came out before it, years before it, and you actually realize that in some ways this was a little bit of like a step to the side or a step backwards. Now again, I say this, that calling Dark Souls 2 a rough game or a worse game than Dark Souls 1 is still having it be in such a pedigree to what it's being compared to, that it is still a good game. The frustrating thing for me about Dark Souls 2 is probably the fact that the game only gets really better once you actually start bringing the DLC into the conversation. Of course, there were 3 pieces of DLC released for the game, and with the release of the DLC, we again in my opinion, started seeing better boss encounters, more interesting boss encounters, more fun boss encounters. But now suddenly this interconnectivity of level design, which I liked so much about the first game, was now back again, having been not present in the base Dark Souls 2. So it's almost like, in a weird way, like I always wonder when it comes to DLC and games, that you do know that there's some studios that design the entire product and then sort of start chopping things out and going, okay, cool, we'll throw this into the DLC and we'll throw this in. And when you look at this, even though I don't think that this is something that From Software would do, when you look at this, it kind of seems like this is the perfect illustrated example of that, where you look at Dark Souls 2 and you go, okay, the game is kind of like okay, but then Jesus, you bring the DLC into the conversation and it's like, delicious. So I have to say that in the terms of how we are rating things on this board here, Dark Souls 2 would be rough for me, but that's because I'm majority remembering the way that I think about this game before we bring the DLC into the picture. And so also because for the sake of this list, we have to have some not so good ones to have good ones. But the point is that when you look at Dark Souls 2, and if I was to take the entire thing and also have the DLCs up here to actually start ranking them in as well, maybe it would have changed the conversation a little bit. But for the sake of this, I'm kind of like regarding Dark Souls 2 as its own. And one last thing I will say about DLC is that something that becomes kind of like a trend with From Software is that their DLC is fucking amazing. Every consequent game that features DLC, including the fact that even with Dark Souls 3, you had a season pass, which was a thing which made a lot of people groan and go like, oh my god, they bring season passes into our From Software games now, what the fuck. But still that did not mess with the quality of what we were getting. So it's like a running trend with these games, and that's what has me so hopeful for any potential DLC that'll come for Alden Ring, is the fact that From Software simply don't fuck around when it comes to DLC. Now, chronologically after that, of course, we get Bloodborne, And Bloodborne honestly is probably, I mean, let's just get this right out of the way. Let's get Bloodborne where it needs to be. Bloodborne is GOAT status for sure. Now, one of the reasons that I like Bloodborne as much as I do, and a later game that we're also going to mention in this franchise, is that when you look at how From Software designed these games, then, and especially if you look at the Dark Souls series, then you can see that it's a set of ideas that they essentially build up on and kind of perfect by the time that you get to Dark Souls 3, for instance. But then at the same time, it shows a studio that in the case of Bloodborne and in the case of something like Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, it's a studio that's not not scared to step outside the boundaries of what they're comfortable with and to sort of put all of their effort behind a specific design idea or specific something that they're hoping to try. For me, with Bloodborne, it was the case that Demon Souls and Dark Souls kind of forces you into this very methodical combat style of sorting and boarding and understanding when you should roll and dodge and understanding when you should block and when you should parry and all of these things. And these become important staples in kind of getting better in playing these games and eventually becoming able to conquer some of the toughest, boss encounters. Where yes, you can over level certain content for sure. The bottom line is, generally speaking, you have to get good, and you have to actually get good at understanding the mechanics of the fight and of what you can do as a player to be able to progress, to proceed. Now then comes Bloodborne, and it kind of turns that whole thing on its head, where Bloodborne's whole thing is that, aggressive combat and like offense being a good defense is actually what they go for in that game. And so it's the one where I think a lot of people will say that's my favorite one because of it's such a frenetic, combat, versus some of the other, Souls games that we've seen. And that's exactly because of this way, like how they've tailored it to the fact, like I said, more aggressive is more rewarding. The fact that you can heal in combat, by actually dealing damage. And so just in general, it was like a breath of fresh air, really, in a genre that From Software had started building up and then said, you know what, let's try something else and let's do that. And Bloodborne is extremely necessary in the evolution of From's games when we look at where we then eventually end up in with something like Sekiro, but also with something like Alden Ring. And so I think also something for me is that Bloodborne feels to me like the most accessible, the most open From Software game that was ever released. And I think that's also why that stands as to why it's so popular with fans, is you have a lot of people that I've run into people that say, not really a fan of the Souls games, but Bloodborne, that's some good shit. So in a way, Bloodborne was already doing something that eventually they would accomplish with Alden Ring, and that is to get completely new people or people that previously shunned away from these games to say, you know what, we might have something that you want to check out and come, and it's definitely to do with the accessibility of the game. It's definitely to do with the change of the combat model. Again, going to that really strong interconnected level design, but then also the fact that they move away from the dark fantasy castles and all that, and it's more Lovecraftian, and it's like, earlier centuries London-esque kind of thing. And so it was something completely new. So you had the new people, but you also had people that were, veterans of the Souls games, and you were able to grab them with something new that could essentially, be like a breath of fresh air, like I said before. Then in March 2016, of course, we get Dark Souls 3. So Dark Souls 3 itself is, as I've mentioned, and I kind of already started making my point for where Dark Souls 3 should lie in this list, is the fact that with Dark Souls 3, you then see the culmination and the payoff of all of this world building that they've been doing at the first and the second game, and all of the lessons that they've learned. So again, I keep harping on about the interconnected level design, but that's their insane boss encounters. Fantastic DLC that is behind the seasonal model, which automatically make people groan and go like, oh fuck, this is gonna suck. But then it's a perfect conclusion to the story, and basically it's just like, this is the way how you finish a franchise. This is the way how you send a game off, how you conclude something. It really is a testament again to a studio that knows how to make the games that they make, and then double down on those things every time, and constantly sort of like, look at something and innovate like within a part of it, where a lot of the things that you see in Dark Souls 3 have had their seeds planted in the previous games and sort of then evolve into this thing that we have now. So it really is the most complete package within that particular franchise. I don't think whatever comes next from Software, I don't think we see another Dark Souls game in that universe. I think this is, done. I mean, if you ask me what we should see next, I mean, it's the perfect time for them now to do something like a Bloodborne 2. My god, that would be so great. I know that From Software don't really have a track record of doing games on their side franchises like Sekiro and Bloodborne, but that would just be amazing. But Dark Souls 3 for me falls firmly as well into what I would consider the amazing category. Again, it's just really good to see all of these things come together, and something that you can always depend on from Software, it feels weird saying the sentence like that, is that their games are pedigree, that it's good stuff. But then they still are able to surprise, and to me that really was what was accomplished with Dark Souls 3. Then after Dark Souls 3, of course, in March 2019, we have Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. And this is where it might get a little bit controversial for me. So I still rate Sekiro very high, and I would definitely put Sekiro into the amazing category. But I think it might be for different reasons that you might be thinking of Sekiro as being a really good game, or possibly even From Software's best game. Tying into what I was saying about Bloodborne is that Sekiro again is an evolution of everything that From Software do in the games, but again in a non-familiar setting and with enough change in it so that veterans who have become experts at a specific combat model and a specific way of playing Souls games now have their heads completely spun off again, because you have to learn something completely new. Sekiro introduced a lot of verticality with the grappling hook, and it reminds me so much of a game that I used to play on PlayStation called Tenchu from back in the day. Completely different kind of franchise game or something, but aesthetically just so similar to that. And the thing for me is that even though I'm not a big fan of the combat model in Sekiro, I appreciate enough of what they were trying to do with it. And again, like we said before, that Bloodborne was really important for the evolution of what we would get in Sekiro, but more important, the evolution of what we would get in something like Elden Ring. This is almost doubly true for Sekiro, where Sekiro's combat again was I think much more flowy, but also much more focused on poise and breaking, staggering enemies and all of that. Then that again sort of like changes the game on you, right? And I know some of my friends, some people that I've discussed this with, again feel just like Bloodborne kind of feels like it's outside, and it's almost like it's a From Software game, but it almost feels like it's not made by From Software, if you guys know what I mean. The point is that Sekiro is kind of like exactly the same. I think Sekiro's boss design is fantastic, and because the game is so laser focused on katana combat and the moveset behind that, and that the fact that you don't have to account for people like power stancing or two katanas or a fucking big hammer or something, and that it essentially just focuses on this one style of combat, allows them to then almost like over engineer the boss encounters because they know the way in which the player will attack the encounter, so they can evolve the encounter around that and sort of make it work for it that way. That also then means to me that, in my opinion, I think Sekiro has some of the most the toughest boss encounters in the game. I definitely think that when you rise above a certain skill level and you start playing Sekiro like a boss, I think you can make a lot of these bosses look like shitheads. But starting out, and again speaking for myself, I struggled with a lot of the bosses, and there's not ever been a Souls game that I felt was too difficult. But Sekiro came kind of very close to that. But I do realize that that is more about me as a player and not about the studio. It's not as if they did this kind of like on purpose and punish people or something like that, but it was more because the game expected a certain evolution from me as a player, which I wasn't doing because I was hard-headedly trying to play the game like I played previous Souls games. And so once I was able to progress past that and let that go and let the game guide me into what combat, the way that I should think and the way that I should play, and having it be geared more towards Sekiro being a standalone experience on its own and not like, Dark Souls 3.5, then it started opening up the game for me. But still, nonetheless, all of those things notwithstanding, it's an amazing experience. And again, just a true testament to how a studio like From Software can go, you know, we make these Victorian, Gothic, fantasy worlds, everything like that. Oh no, well, guess what? We can also do like feudal Japan, feudal China, whatever you want to call it, samurai times, ninjas, all that. And they just do it so well, much better than anybody else who's been making tons of games in that sphere could ever do. Then our second last one is, of course, the Demon's Souls remake, which was released on PS5 in 2020. I think it was also March or something like that. And for me, this was a adequate game, a good game. I really enjoyed it. It was the first Souls game that I ever streamed to an audience, and so I had a lot of fun with that. It's always fun, you know, dying in weird ways and, you know, sort of having that audience interaction that as well. So in that way, it has a special memory to me too. The thing though about it is, because it is it's a remake of the first game that doesn't change too much about the first game. The point is that Demon's Souls itself was rather, especially if you compare it to later games in the franchise, was kind of like not there was not a lot of depth to it, is the best way I can put it. So some great boss design, some just kind of very mediocre level design, also nothing to, you know, like blow your hair back, anything like that, but again, fully serviceable. And in the universe of this, just, you know, a good experience, but nothing special, you know, nothing crazy good. The point being that I think the main selling thing for this was, of course, the fact that it was a exclusive to PS5. And I mean, you just have to admit that this game's graphics is ridiculous on the PS5. It was amazing what they were able to do with the remaster of this. And if anything, what the remaster did for me is it just made me go like, my God, please let them just like do the same thing with like Dark Souls or Dark Souls 2. If they could do the same thing with that, maybe even like, I mean, Bloodborne is still kind of like an okay looking game, but Jesus, the upgrade that they were able to bring to this game was so insane. The fidelity is ridiculous. And while there aren't a lot of games that would make me go, you know, you have to buy a PS5 so that you can play this game, I don't think the remake is that. But if you have a PS5 and you have any kind of remote interest in the Souls universe, then you gotta play the remake. You have to have it on your roster. Then last but not least, of course, we get to the most recent one. Now, because of the fact that Alden Ring is so recent, and I'm not even going to discuss the reasons why it is a GOAT. It is clearly a GOAT, is because every single point that I've been discussing up until now essentially culminates into this and gives us this product that pulls all of the best from all of these previous games and almost none of the negative. It has to be said that you might consider Alden Ring, at least in my opinion, that this is not only like the best game of the year, which it will most likely definitely win, but it's also like a mission statement for open world games, and the fact that the old way of looking at open world games is dead now. Any studio that looks at to making something similar to this, like in an open world franchise, whether it's a Assassin's Creed, an Ubisoft game, whatever that is, or any other open world game that sort of taps into the same themes and kind of works the same thing as this, if they aren't influenced by Alden Ring, then I kind of feel automatically that they're shooting themselves in the foot. I'm by no means advocating that anybody should copy From Software. I don't think they could in any case if they wanted to. But you have to kind of like look at this and have this sort of influence you and change your mind a little bit when it comes to designing games in this sphere. Almost like the same way that if cars ran before with fucking square tires, now From Software have just created the, you know, circle tire, and it's a fucking game changer, and from now on nobody can drive on squares anymore. I know it's a stupid example, it's a stupid analogy, but that is really the way that I feel about this. And it is in many ways going to be super interesting to see how this develops over time and which studios kind of take this sort of like advice to heart and which don't. What's also going to be really interesting is to see if From Software continue on with this amazing track record that they have when it comes to releasing DLC. I think there's a lot of things that can still be explored within Alden Ring, and so I'm hoping that we don't just get one piece of DLC for this game, but maybe 2 or 3. but more specifically that this DLC just further on develops the world, which is so interesting, so amazing, but just doubles down on this fantastic sort of foundation that the previous games have laid, but more specifically that Alden Ring has like sort of thrown itself over and just made risen to the top. But that's it, and that's it for my list. So I'm super interested to hear what you guys have to say about that. Of course, let me know in the comments below how you would structure your list and what you would move up, what you would move down. There is certainly an argument to be said that you could literally put all of these into the amazing category, possibly even all of these into the GOAT category. We are dealing with a studio here that knows what they're doing and that are very good at what they're doing. But that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic day, a great afternoon, and a super awesome evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.